joined up till now. We have almost around 37, 38 participants.
I see.
So I welcome everyone, and on behalf of Alvin Integrated Services, it is really a pleasure for me to moderate this session today. And when I say Alvin Integrated Services is into training, consulting, and this knowledge sharing, which is a very good initiative they have taken today. This is the fifth webinar in the knowledge sharing session, which is exclusively based on ISO standards, compliance, and applicability. We had some time back one of the webinar delivered by another industry stalwart like Tony, Mr. Sanjay Gore, and fortunately we have today Sanjay Goreji also in this webinar. So thank you so much, Alvin, and we have been waiting for a long time now. So I won't be taking too much of time. I should be very brief now. Let me introduce Tony Chebli to you. So Tony comes with uh, more than 2 decades of experience. Uh, Other than having the qualifications, he has got a rich experience in handling cyber security, information security, risk management, cyber audits, security audits, training, and consulting in various, you can say, the domains. More so, he is a certified, a PECB certified lead auditor also. He is a PECB certified cyber security manager also. Now, other than that, he has been handling this portfolio for a long time now with a company called Credit Lebanese in Lebanon, and he is heading the information security department. So today, what we are going to cover is since he has handled the major portion of ISO compliance, which is gap assessment, risk assessment, and statement of applicability, defining various controls of the standard. So these basic 3 points, which are the main focus of any ISO, especially the information security. And in today's time, while we are hit by this COVID worldwide, it is
قدرت
really,
أخلص يا رب.
yeah, it is, we are hit very badly by this COVID, and it has really become very important to keep our abreast of the latest knowledge which is going on, how people are handling the various scenarios, how the information security is handled, the data privacy is handled. And on this, I would welcome Tony, and over to you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon for the Lebanese community. I'm sorry for what happened. It was just time. Okay, today my presentation will be should be very interactive. I'm going to tackle the ISO from the perspective of business and technical. So I would like to everyone to participate in this one with me. So let's be very interactive with this one. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can everyone see my screen or not yet? Okay.
No, Mr. Tony, you have to share it again.
Okay, I'm trying. All right. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, now.
Yeah, we can see that now. Please go ahead.
Great. Okay. So basically, I use this, let's say, title for the ISO 27001. Is it between the reality and the myth? So let's start with my first question to everyone, the participant. Do you think that ISO 27001 is a myth or a reality? Before I give my opinion on that. Can I see someone just sharing their information just to talk about it? Please, let's be interactive and let's have your opinion on this. What do you think? Is it a reality or a myth? Having the certification.
Yeah, anyone wants to interact, kindly raise your hand so that we can unmute you and then you can interact.
Anyone?
We have provided a facility to the participant. They can unmute themselves.
Yeah, please do that, and then probably, yeah, we have one Mr. Musa joining. He'll be asking.
Okay, great.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Tony. Yeah, hello. Am I
Hello.
audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. This is Yash Saxena from SCIT. Yeah. So in our terms, that ISO 27001 is a reality in terms of the corporate. Like say, we can say that it depends on the what are the controls we are using. Are they really important for us or not? So it depends on the corporate company to company.
So you think it is reality or a myth or both?
It's reality.
It's reality. Great. Okay.
Thank
Someone
you.
else? Anyone to participate? Any thoughts? Okay. Since nobody would like to, I will go on. So basically, ISO 27001, it's a management decision. And it is the only auditing specification that you can have it for information security. Someone would tell me now we can have certification at PCI DSS. The difference between ISO and ISO and PCI is PCI applies only for cards environment, where ISO 27001 applies everywhere, even for a company that they don't have even a computer. I did have one setup which we certified as data. They had only files, so we were doing this for 27001. And at the end, I would like to as well to raise a question for you. Most of you are technical. When something goes wrong in any organization, who would be blamed? Who will have, let's say, on his shoulder everyone and start to shout on him? What do you think?
Top management.
Who will be blamed for something like something goes wrong?
IT department.
IT department. What about security? There will be as well under the radar or not? What do you think?
Totally depends on what kind of what kind of problem you faced. Was it a threat? Was it what kind of damage was done? Was it a kind of a
Great.
physical damage or what kind of attacks? Something like that.
That's true.
You would try to understand what kind of incident is it in first place.
Yeah, and it's basically the chain of people who are involved in it, like top management from information security, like CISO, CIO, and again, one thing I would like to tell you that auditor is also.
Do you think, Abhishek, this is fair for the IT and the security CISO to be blamed or not?
Yeah, it
Is
is.
it fair?
No, it is not fair.
Not fair. We can't say they should be blamed, but the external auditors, internal auditors.
It's a collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes. So the responsibility of security for information is everyone within the organization. To move the hassle from the IT, I'm not saying that the IT and the CISO are not responsible. They are. At the end, we need something to be, everyone is participating in this. That's why we call it ISO 27 is a management tool. We transfer things from technical to business. At the end, if I don't have a budget, I don't have the support from the management, I cannot achieve anything in security. So we switch from something technical to a business perspective. At the end, when we do security, we align whatever they have as a security with the business. Without the business, we cannot work, and with the business cannot work without the IT and security. So we transform this hassle from IT and security to everyone within the organization, and everyone will be responsible. Yes, I know that the IT are responsible. If they lack on doing something they should do, they will be blamed, but not everything happens because of them. If someone raise a, let's say, a flag and say, we need 1, 2, 3, a firewall or whatever it is, whatever control we need, and the management would not approve that, and something goes wrong, in most cases that I have witnessed, the management will try to blame the IT, but I have raised it to you. No, you didn't say enough. So basically we changed those problems from technical to something like that. So we need to make sure that the IT are not the IT are doing this. So everyone should participate and everyone should be in the same area. So that's why ISO, as you can see in my presentation states, it's a management tool. It's to manage problems within information security management system. So the objective of this standard is to achieve that. And if you look at ISO, why I always choose ISO. If you look at GDPR, if you look at PCI, even if to NIST framework, there are some comparison sheets between all those frameworks and those standards. If you are ISO 27001, it means 85 or 95% of requirements of the other standards or frameworks, we comply with them. So ISO 27001 is very essential, because at the end we will get someone, to a third party, come and say, yes, I will stamp that network, I will stamp that business, and I will do it. Now back to my question, the first one is it a reality or a myth? It depends on the objective of having the ISO. I witnessed one of the companies, they don't only care of having him as a marketing tool. They had like online banking, they want to certify the online banking. Regardless, whatever it has as a backend, they achieve the certification for online banking, and they want to use it as a marketing. That was something that is a myth, where someone had a problem. I witnessed as well with one company, they had every day 10 incidents per day. After that, when they implement ISMS, instead of having 10 incidents, they dropped into 1 incident per day. And afterward, the incidents dropped tremendously until 1 per month, we had like 2 or 3 incidents. So that became a reality. So it depends on the position from business, what they are looking at. At the end, the business decide what to do with the ISMS and what to do with the certification. Do you agree with this or no?
Yes, yes.
The latest version in 2013, we know that PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, and Act, is all about the ISMS. You need to have, we'll see how it's going to happen. But on version 2013, we add one more section, which is to have kind of KPIs. As I mentioned, if I have an ISMS, now a company who's really serious about the certification, they want to improve their data security. If they implement the ISMS and whatever they had as a problem, and the problem is still the same, it means your ISMS implementation is not adequate. You need to revisit and do it again. So it's very important to have a KPIs. That's why 2013 version was one of, I would say, a jump between the first one, the 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 2013, where KPIs start to show up and say, yes, we made a difference with the 27001 with our implementation, and now we are having a good references. Now the benefits are tremendous. Today we are having like this conversation together, all of you. I am sitting in Lebanon, you are in India. Suppose I want to deal with a company in India. How would I say, if I want to use their cloud services, how can I tell that they have a good practice in security in their premises? How can I rely on them and say I can do business with them? What do you think? Why we need this? 27001, if I want to deal with any company, I would say, ask them the question, are you certified? If they say no, using a cloud-based company, I don't know how much I need to go. Shall I fly to India to check what they are doing and do an audit on their premises? Or having this certification will help me? Of course, if I have the certification, things will be easier for between business people. And this is how I had the same story with one company that they were trying to outsource, to give us a service over the cloud. My question was, how can I trust what you're doing? Their answer was, for me, have a pen test. Having a pen test against their premise on the internet doesn't mean anything. You know, pen test is like having a snapshot of a picture that have a snapshot, and you start to analyze it. You don't know what's happening beyond that picture, before and after. You need someone to really give you a comfort that they are practicing a good security within their organization. So having a company that is certified, I would pick between, if I have 2 companies offering me a service, one was certified 27001, the other one is not certified. Of course, I would pick the certified one. So that's why 27001 is very important, especially when we deal with the COVID-19, with overseas, with all those things. So we need someone to give us let's say a comfort zone, saying, okay, we can work with those. They know how to, they have a good practice within their organization. They do respect the data protection. GDPR, to give you an example, one of the requirements is to have a due diligence with third-party companies. How can I do that? So when I have someone certified, it's easier for me to pick a certified company than having a company that I'm not aware of whatever they're going to tell me. Even if they keep on saying every day that they are secure, they have all the protection, I need someone to just to say, yes, they are. And this is what they are claiming of. Do you agree what I'm saying? Any comments?
No, this is perfect. Actually, Tony, what you are saying is this becomes a basis of your interaction with any of the organizations providing the kind of services you are looking forward to. You have to look into data privacy, you have to look into information security, and these two are the pillars. And ISO 27000, as you rightly said, provides the basis of that interaction.
Of course.
Yeah.
So basically, when you have 27001 certified and you're within your organization, most of the requirements of any other framework, you would comply with, like, say 85 or 90%. Keep only 15 to work on it. I can speak about my experience. Crédit Lyonnais is really okay. We have our headquarters in Lebanon, but we have as well other banks in the Gulf. We have in Africa, and we have in Europe. So when I start working based on 27001, most of the requirements, every time there is a new requirement coming from central banks in those regions, I don't have to work a lot. I can do it easily because most of the requirements are covered with ISO. Still, okay, 15 to 10%. That's what makes a difference. Okay, at the end, we're talking about an information security management system. This is where you have to develop a system within your organization. And this system is continually upgraded. It's always monitored. You need to, as I mentioned before, if you have a system, you implement a system without having any improvement of what you have, your system is not adequate. You need to change it again. You need to revisit and try to see what's happening. So that's why it's very important to have a nice MS system. You know how what's all about the system. We're going to see it now. So once you have this clause, as it's mentioned in the clause 4.4, you need to comply with the clause 4 to 10, and including the Annex A, which is 114 controls. So you have like different controls that you need to start with. But just to have a technical controls of the Annex A, we are talking about to start with 114 controls. If you don't have those 114 controls, if you want to do it from out of your head, the best you can have, like say 10, 20 or 30 controls from your head. But if you have a framework in place, you have someone guiding you, you will have a good control starting with 114. Now, how would you, if you want to achieve the 27001, I'm just giving a small brief about this. You need to set your organization, you sit with your management. Okay, you say, okay, I want to have my ISMS certified, and we need to apply the plan, do, check, and act, PDCA. So we start having information security policy, which is the ground zero. You need to identify the organization assets. You classify those assets within the scope we are talking about. At the end, I would like to open just a small bracket here. You can have certification for the entire organization, or you can just pick a small unit or a small department to start with. It depends on the environment you are working with. I have worked with companies that I started in a small department or small unit to feel how ISO is interacting, if there is really something is going to bring to the table. So you have to define the scope. You need, okay, this is my organization. You build your security policy. You identify your assets within the scope which we're talking about, and need to classify those assets based on ISO, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Once you classify your assets, you do a risk assessment. You identify those weaknesses within your assets and within the scope. You apply the controls. Here, when we start, we're talking about operational process. Here, we have to develop many documentation. You know, ISO, PCI, all the frameworks, they adore to have documents. We need to have procedures. You need to have standards. You need to have policies, and of course, standard operating procedures within where you are working with. Once you implement, you build your ISMS, you need to have an audit process. Again, you have audit within your organization to start auditing on the ISMS. Once the audit is completed, there will always observations. If there is or non-conformities, you need to fix them. This is where comes the corrective actions. And then you need to meet as a management review within your organization. And this is how it's all about. This is the process that we are talking about. So basically, this is how it's all about to achieve or to make the ISO 27001. Now, this is very illustrated. It's very easy. It looks very easy, but at the end, there is so much detail within. You need to work a lot on this. We expect normally to have a process between 1 year to 2 years. It depends on the scope and the size of the company that you want to have to achieve the certification. Now, once you build this from the perspective of the auditor, this is what he wants to see. This is what he's going to ask you for. Today, as it was mentioned in the agenda, our phase 1, I'm going to speak about phase 1 and phase 3. That's it. The rest, if you have any question, I'm really open to answer anything like you want to know. The certification process starts with the initial review and gap analysis. Second, you need to have an awareness training. One of the elements that the auditor will ask you is to have the first document, which is the review and the gap analysis. Second, all the parties or the employees, individuals within the scope should participate into an awareness training. You cannot have someone within the scope of ISO, and if they have some meeting with the auditor and say, I have no clue about ISMS, I'm not aware, nobody told me about this, you have a problem. So it's very important to have an awareness training for all the individuals within the scope. The third phase, which is identifying the asset within the scope and classify them. Then you need to have a risk assessment, statement of applicability within the phase 3, which we're going to see later on. Planning and building the ISMS, as I mentioned for you earlier, that you need to document. You have to prepare most of the documentation within this phase. Then we have internal audit. You have to have an internal auditor to audit the ISMS. The internal auditor will have a relationship with the external auditor, because if there is any non-conformities identified by the external auditor, they can communicate in order to solve this. The third phase, the last phase, is pre-certification and certification. And the pre-certification, sometimes the companies are not comfortable with saying, I can certify myself. I need a pre-assessment. This is where the auditor comes without or unofficially to check your setup and try to find if there is any problem. If you are really aware of your certification, if you are really confident of your implementation, you can go immediately to certification and the auditor will do the certification for you. So those are mainly the phases that you will have during the certification phase.
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
Phase number.
Can you raise your voice, because it's not I cannot hear you well.
Can you hear now?
Yes, it's better.
Okay. Regarding phase 2, which is the training.
Yes.
Assume there is a international organization which has many branches in different countries. How can
Yes.
this handled? It can be, for example, you shared only a PDF document or video. Is it enough, or there should be a training, for example, face-to-face or through some applications?
When we talk about awareness training, we're talking about for the individuals or the employees within the scope.
Yes. Yeah, assume this organization, they wanted all of the organization to be ISO certified. So all
Yes.
the branches.
And they have different branches everywhere.
Yes. I assume they have one in Europe, one in India, a third one in Australia, like this. So you can just share, for example, my question, PDF document as awareness session. Just let them to read it and that's it. Is it
No,
enough?
no, 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 no. At the end, you need. At the end, if you have overseas, because I have the same case.
Yeah.
When I do training overseas, we can have it like what we are doing today, or you can have online training. Plus, you need to have a quiz to just to make sure that they got the message. You don't want to have a problem during the auditor session, where if someone asks, like, if they ask them a question, any individual within or any employee within the scope, they say nobody told me anything, and I'm not aware of what's ISO. So if you have that, you will have a problem. So it's very important to deliver the message and make sure that the message is delivered and everyone is able to understand it. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other question concerning the, let's say, the wrap up of the certification of 27001?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Please.
Suppose I have a company where I just want to get to achieve that certification, and I have completed, I have implemented the 112 controls out of 114. Two control I don't want to add just because of my business, that my business will not go on flow. So will I get the certification or not?
You're talking about the Annex A, 114 controls.
Yeah, so out of 114 controls, I've implemented 112. Two controls I haven't implemented because of my business. That I don't want my client to be more, just want that control not to be there for my continuity of my plan for my business. So will I get the certification or not?
You have to justify why you haven't implemented the other 12, the other two controls. I can give you an example which I faced in Africa. One of the countries in Africa, they used to ban the encryption. You know, in one of the controls within the Annex A, you have to encrypt the sensitive data, correct?
Yes.
So because of the law within the country, which is supersede and cancel, if you want, the Annex A in this control, I was able to get them certification. When you talk about, I'm going to speak about it later on the statement of applicability. Every control that you apply, you have to justify why it's implemented and why it's not implemented for everything.
Okay.
And
So
if you
I
have a
justify the
waiver,
statement, then
you
that's
need to
not
have
the
a
problem.
waiver.
Okay, got it.
If you don't have a waiver, you cannot, the auditor will ask you, why did you didn't apply? It's not justifiable.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
No problem. So, initial review and gap analysis. From the perspective, not because I'm having this flag of ISO and I like it. No, at the end, I would invite every company, especially when I'm giving consultancy to anyone, I would ask and I would require from any company to do initial review and gap analysis against ISO. When you do this, you would know how much they are close or far from the certification and how much the practice within their organization is applied. In fact, I had one situation where I did have one initial review and gap analysis with one company, with the one bank actually in the Gulf for the online banking. The result was not satisfactory. So there was so much gap. We did apply, as you can see in front of you, we have to check against the clause A5, clause 4, 5, 6 until the 10 and the Annex A. When I did the gap analysis, there was so much gaps. So the guy did see that the report was so huge, so he decided not to carry on to go with the certification. They postponed it for 2 years. After 2 years, they again, we did a second initial review and gap analysis. The result was much, much better, and they decided to go on with the certification. So I would recommend for every company, even if they don't have the intention to be certified, at least have an initial review and gap analysis. This will give them a good eye, especially from the business perspective, from the CEO perspective, to know where his company stands for. And we need to move the burden from the IT and the security. We don't want all the time to be let's say, blamed on whatever happens within the organization. It's not my problem if the management decides not to buy a certain control. As you mentioned before, someone asked me, if I have, instead of having the 114 controls, I just applied 50 or 60. Okay, the rest means that we are somewhere vulnerable to any attack. I don't want to be blamed. It's the management decision not to say no, will not apply those controls. It's up to them. So we move the burden from the technical team to the business or the C-suite and let them decide what to do with that. All we have to do is just to show them what's all about. So initial review and gap analysis is very important for any organization if they want to know where they are positioned. With the privacy now, with GDPR and everything, that will give us a good idea how much these companies are really practicing a good security, safeguarding data or information within the organization. Any question concerning the initial review and gap analysis? Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is clear.
All right. A risk assessment, one of the most important, let's say, activity that it should be performed. The risk, what is risk assessment? At the end, risk for me is uncertainty. If we talk about risk in general, that is the risk which is positive, negative, or neutral. A risk in a business perspective, yes, it might be positive. If someone invests in one company, let's say he bought some shares, and at the end, the shares, they start, let's say they bought at let's say $10, and the shares become after 1 year or 2 years, 100. So the risk was a positive. Sometimes it's neutral if I kept the same share. Sometimes it's negative if I lose the amount of what I have paid. Unfortunately, when we talk about security, information security, we only look at the negative point. So from our perspective, we always look at the bad things that's going to happen, not the good things. So from security, information security, and ISO 27005, we look at the risk, which is if there is something is going to materialize. The risk assessment or risk management is a process. It means that it's not one time we do it. It should be continuous, at least once or twice per year. It depends on the scope what we are talking. And again, when we talk about security, we always put boundaries or scope. Whatever we want to do, we always pick a scope and say, okay, I'm going to do a risk assessment for, let's say, the IT department or security department or the financial department. Whatever we want, we put always boundaries. Within those boundaries, we need to identify the assets. The asset that can be the supporting those, let's say, supporting the process within the department. So I need to define, once I define the boundaries, any department, let's say this is a financial department, I would ask the second question, what are your processes? What are your processes within this department? Once I identify those processes, I start looking at the tools or the assets that they are supporting those processes. It could be server, it could be application, it could be as well people or documents. So those assets within this scope are identified. Once we identify them, we need to give them a classifications. Once we classify them, we're going to see this later on. We need to identify the threats and vulnerability against those assets. This is how we can get the risk assessment. Of course, there is a risk assessment, quantitative and qualitative. I would use most of the time the quantitative because the qualitative, because I need to know, I want to compare the assessment between asset A and asset B. It's not up to me to say how much it's going to cost me money. So I leave this to the business. So most of the time that I conduct my risk assessment based on ISO, I use the quantitative assessment. Of course, once we identify the assets, once we do the risk assessment, we need to have classification of those risks. We do have options to do with them. What we do, apply the controls, or we transfer, or we say, okay, I want to avoid or I want to treat. We're going to see it later on. So those are the options that we have in front of us. So it depends what we want to do with them. And we're going to see later on how we do a process that we need to develop. At the end, when we talk about assessment, about a process, we need to have a procedure to conduct the risk assessment. And this risk assessment should be performed by anyone within the company. Now the question is, who is going to do it? Is it the business or the IT or the security? Normally, we do it as a security with the business, because if you ask any business people, you ask them, what is it important your department? How much it is important? They will say, because of me, if something goes wrong to my department, the company will close down. So we don't want to have those issues when we try to do a risk assessment. We need to have a risk assessment which is up to the expectation, with the real numbers, with real threats and vulnerabilities. Is it clear for everyone here? Again, as I mentioned to you, the risk management is a process of identifying, addressing, and probable disruption. So for us, it's uncertainty. When the uncertainty becomes true, so the risk becomes tangible, and this is where we have a problem. So we need to have a risk management process in place. We need to define what are the strategies, how we want to do the risk assessment. It's up to you. There is so many methods. There are so many frameworks that you can find on the internet. As long as you whatever any process you pick, you need to describe it for someone who's going to read after you. So the auditor from ISO 270 will not question what method you did. However, they will try to see what you have identified. So you need to define the strategies. You need to identify the risk, analyze them, prioritize the risk. Of course, you're not going to treat a risk which is low, where you have some extremely important. So you need to treat those. And we have the mitigation plan, as I mentioned before. You have avoid, you have to transfer, you have to mitigate, you have to accept at the end. And of course, once we treat whatever we have, there is always inherent risk that we have to accept afterward. So this is what we have to do as a risk management. So as I mentioned to you before, so we're talking about uncertainty of something. Risk is uncertainty. We express the risk of impact. If something goes wrong, what will be the impact on the company? Is it going to be huge, let's say medium, low, or high? It depends how you want to specify. And of course, when we talk about threats, there is always threats, but if they are not associated with vulnerabilities, the threat cannot be materialized. So we look at the vulnerabilities and threats. We cannot stop the threats, because at the end, people will try to steal money. However, we can try to stop the vulnerabilities. We try to mitigate the vulnerabilities to stop those threats against us. So again, risk and threats are always going hand in hand. There is a confusion between risk and threat. No, a risk is when a threat is materialized, the uncertainty becomes certainty, and this is where we have. So threats could be someone like a fire, drifting, a PC. Here we have like computer virus. All of those are threats. Example of threats. So now a practical approach, which I use all the time myself, which is having the organization assets. We need to identify risk related to those assets, and we have to see how much the risk is associated. I'm going to show you an example of my procedure to do a risk assessment. This is a high level of the risk assessment process, where I identify the information assets. Of course, I need to associate the owner, because the owner for me is the business people, who is let's say, the head of the department. We need to identify threats and vulnerabilities, and we assess the impact of those threats and vulnerabilities. How we assess them? By looking at the likelihood of occurrence. Now the question is, the likelihood of occurrence, how we can have those data. We can go back in time, let's say for 5 years, and see how much it happened. For instance, you have a mobile, let's say, portable PC. One of the companies used to have losing their one laptop per month. It means that someone was stealing this. So the probability of having one per month is really there. So this is how we went. I went back to the in history, and this is how I did say the impact is very high. So you look at those impact, and of course we have to look at the present situation and on the future. You cannot say that if I don't have any virus attack today, it doesn't mean that in the coming month I will not have a virus attack, a virus exposure. So you need to look at it. This is where the let's say the expertise of the consultant will come up with this situation. I had one situation, one company. They said we didn't experience any threat from virus for the last 2 years. My question was, do you have a sandbox within your organization? They said no. Okay, I told them, let's put one sandbox just to show you what's the difference. After we put the sandbox, they implemented the sandbox within their organization. The first day, the sandbox tried to trap many emails going back and forth with so many emails, with so many viruses, and the company was not aware of this. So basically, you need to look at the risk assessment. When we talk about the impact and the likelihood of occurrence, it's not just today, it's about in the history, about today, and in the potentially in the future, if you can see that. Any question? My question to you, since you don't have a question, how would you classify an asset? Any volunteer? How would you classify an asset?
So to check the importance of something, we have to remove that for a particular time. So we'll get the importance of that particular assets.
Can you repeat? I didn't hear you well.
Anything
Please.
that adds value to your.
Okay. Anything that is value to you, but how would you, in practical, how would you you classify it?
How much loss we will get if we got the if we are not having that particular assets? How much expense we need to recover that assets?
Okay, great. I think we are saying the same thing. When we identify assets based on, we classify the asset based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For each asset, we look at how much confidentiality, how much integrity, and how much availability if this asset is lost. Then we take the average of this one and we have the classification of assets. Do you do it this way yourself or no?
Yes, on the basis of the security threat, right? Correct.
Yes. So you have confidentiality, integrity, availability. Here,
Yeah.
when you talk about this, you need to you need to identify, you have to specify how is the classification is done. To give you an example, I classify my assets based on 1 to 5, on a scale 1 to 5. 1, if the information is, let's say, exposed to the outside. 1 is, for me, it's negligible. 2, it's minor. 3, it's 3, let's say it's major. 4, it's serious, and 5, it's extremely serious. So this is how you classify each asset for you. On a scale 1 to 5 for confidentiality, integrity, availability, you apply the same thing for all of them. And this is how you do a classification. This is how, when I come as an auditor for you, I would look at your classification. I would see your risk assessment, let's say, present procedure. And based on that, I will try to look at what you are doing. The second thing is from where you can get the threats and vulnerabilities. Can you have all of them in your head? Where you can find them? What about threats and vulnerabilities? Can you map them?
That is what risk assessment is all about, actually.
Yes. Do you have a list? Where do you get them?
Yeah, there are certain parameters based on which you assess the kind of potential threats and vulnerabilities and the kind of checkpoints, and then basically then you come to the mitigation part of it. Unless you have these threats and vulnerabilities exercise, you cannot.
That's so. For me, I get the 27. You know, the 27005, the standard. They have like informative. It's not, of course, it's not exhaustive. The list, you can have a list of threats and vulnerability which is associated to each other, and this is where I can start from there. So I will not miss something that might be applicable to my threats, to my assets. It's very important to have a list which is always increasing to make sure that you will not miss any threats and vulnerability associated to your assets.
And how about the regular scans that we perform to identify these vulnerabilities? Those are also a type of like a process of identifying those.
Can you repeat what you said, because really the voice was not clear at all.
Ankita, your voice was not clear. Can you repeat the question, please?
Or you can write down on the chat box.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. The last point, which is develop a risk treatment plan. Do you think that the treatment plan should be identified every time you have a risk assessment, or you?
Okay, I'm so sorry. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Yes, we are. We can. Good.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Am I clear now?
Now it's back.
Oh.
Again, it's breaking. You can write down on chat box.
Okay, great. At the end, when we talk about development risk treatment plan, your treatment plan should be already identified and written within the risk assessment process, within the procedure. You don't want to have every time there is a risk assessment, you go back to the management and say, what shall we treat? What shall we do? What shall we accept? So basically, you need to discuss this with the management before doing any risk assessment. You go to the management and say, what are the threshold that we're going to work with it? Here, I'm just giving you an illustration. It's not just illustration, where this is a table where we mentioned, where we decided that anything that is above 16 as a risk assessment, it should be treated. Now the treatment could be, as I mentioned, transferred. I can go to insurance, or I can hire a service provider on the cloud or whatever service I want to have. Then I can treat, if there is, if it's locally, I will treat it myself. And below than that, I have to accept. Now, for the ISO 27001, when we talk about transferring the let's say the risk, it means that I'm taking everything to the supplier, and the supplier will be in charge of this, and he will be responsible. Unfortunately, with GDPR, if I transfer my risk to a third party, like a service provider, I am and him as a company and the third service provider, we will have to share the same impact. If something goes wrong, it's not just him, it's not just the service provider, but as well who hired this service provider will be penalized by GDPR, unfortunately. Oh, do we still have time?
Yeah, we do have time, Tony. Please carry on.
Okay. Any question regarding this point? Is it clear for everyone why it's so important to have a risk assessment, and it is important to show it to the auditor? At the end, a risk assessment is where we have to identify the risk before the threats get materialized. Of course, we cannot cover everything in one session. The risk assessment, that's why it should be continuous, at least twice per year, I would recommend, and you can do it more. If you can do it more, it will be better. And it should be done with the business owner, not from a technical perspective, not from security perspective alone. It should be the involvement of the business should be always within the process. They need to classify the assets. It's not us to classify for them. Okay, we will help them to classify the assets. Of course, we will help them and guide them to identify the threats and vulnerabilities. Remember, those are business people. They don't understand what's a virus, what's a, let's say, outbreak, virus outbreak, or malicious code, or anything that is related to something is called cybersecurity. We need to help them. We need to guide them to identify the threats and the vulnerabilities associated to those assets, and generate a list of risks that we need to work with. So this is just in front of you a small table that I did develop, showing that anything beyond, as I mentioned before, showing above 16, it should be treated. A statement of applicability. Yes, please. Go ahead.
So will you please give us the example of that formula, likelihood into impact? How will you calculate that?
Remember when I told you that you need to classify the assets? Someone mentioned to me how much is this important for me. So the impact comes from the asset classification. Let's take an example, email server.
Yes.
For a certain company. Who is the owner of first of all, of the email server, do you think? Email application, not the service, excuse me.
Nobody, it's for the organization itself.
There should be someone, some owner. Come on.
You may say the CEO or IT manager.
No. CEO cannot be owner of everything. CEO is owner of everything. We don't want everything is going back to CEO.
Receiver of that mail.
No, the application I'm talking, not the email by itself.
Okay.
Actually, it should be the operations. If you have an operations division, the operation division is the owner of the email application, okay?
Yes.
All right. Now, based on this, what will be the, if we go to the operation, say, we want to classify the email application, how much confidentiality over scale from 1 to 5, how much integrity 1 to 5, and how much 1 to 5 availability. When we talk about those scales, let's say confidential, it should be 3 because it should not be, the confidential should be, let's say, moderate, okay? It's a moderate. Integrity 3 as well, moderate. And availability 3 is available. We can stay without the email server for, let's say, 2 days, 3. So the average will be 3, okay?
Yes.
So the asset now it's classified as 3 as an average. Now the likelihood of having a threat. What will be the threat for me is to have a virus outbreak. Someone breaking this, we have a virus that's going to stop the email server. How it's going to be vulnerable? We don't have an antivirus up to date. The likelihood, excuse me, the likelihood of having this virus outbreak is having like every month, at least twice or three times per month. So from my perspective, because it's happening three times per month or per week, I would say it's going to be 4, 5. Now you once you have the classification, which is the impact 3, and the likelihood of occurrence is 5, you multiply and you get, let's say, suppose 15. This is how you can have the risk factor.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Is it clear, or do you have any doubt? We can have another example. Clear for you?
Yes, sir. Sure. Clear.
Okay. The last, topic of our seminar today, which is the statement of applicability. As I mentioned to you before, you have the full Annex A, which is the 114 controls. You take one by one. You have to put them in an Excel sheet, and you have to specify why it is applied and why it's not applicable in your environment, and you have to justify for each and every one. Again, I will repeat, statement of applicability. You need to take all the controls, the 114 controls, you put them in Excel or whatever you want, if you want a plan, and you mention for everyone why it's applicable and why it's not applicable in your case. and you have to justify. Now back to someone asked me, they are applying 112, only 2 they didn't want to apply. Can you justify why they don't want to apply it?
Hi, Tony. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
This is, as you said at the beginning of the session, it depends on which area you are going to get certifications in ISO 27001. This is why in this statement of applicability, you are going to define which area it's interested for you, even if it is applicable or not. You have to mention all the controls and to report to the management what is applicable and what it is not applicable, and on which area you are going to get audit or implementation of the system and to get certification.
Okay, just to add what you've said, if you don't have a waiver, a justifiable waiver for any of those 114 controls, you cannot say, I will not apply it. Because what we'll do as an auditor, I'm talking about now, I'm having the hat of the 27001 auditor who's going to give you a certification. I will ask you, give me this statement of applicability. As I mentioned to you, before doing any audit, I will request all those documents. I would have them reviewed before coming on site to do the audit. So I would look at every control of the 114 and we'll look at them if you justify why you're not apply it. As I mentioned to you, I had one case in Africa because the country was forbidding the company to apply the encryption because it's coming from the law of the country. Now, if you want to do it, if you take any example of the 114 controls and try to say why I'm not applying it, you need to get a real waiver why you will not apply the other 114 controls. Don't take my example. Can someone come up with an example where he might have a waiver of having not all 114 controls applied?
If your company is not doing a source code development, so it will be excluded within the scope.
That's one of the options. Another example, that's true. Someone with another example can say, give me a waiver for not having all the controls applied.
If your organization do not hire any third party for any IT jobs or something.
That's true. How about remote working? I'm not allowing any of my employees to work from home. Then you will have a waiver. Correct?
Yeah.
So basically, again, the 114 controls should be implemented unless you have a real justifiable waiver to say, I will not apply it. This is one of the important documents that you have to submit to the auditor.
Sorry.
All right. Let's open as I mentioned to you, we are not having like a university course here. It's a very interactive. Let's have it more interactive. Any question is welcome within the ISO 27, even if it's not, even if I didn't tackle the topic today because it was only 3 topics. You can ask any question regarding ISO 27001. The questions are open.
Abhishek, you wanted to know something about how do we find the cost for risks. You can ask the question directly, Abhishek.
Excuse me?
Abhishek, can you hear me? You wanted to know how do we find the cost for risks. So you can ask that question from Tony directly.
Okay. Someone is asking how we can find the cost for the risk.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. That's a good question. At the end, the cost of not having of negliging the risk is a problem. You need to know once you start doing a risk assessment. You say, okay, you need to now you have to switch from as I mentioned to you, I have quantitative and qualitative. instead of doing a qualitative risk assessment, you go to quantitative risk assessment. And this is where the dollar sign or the money start to, you can see, okay, if this asset is lost or if it's down for this 2 hours. To give you an example, e-commerce site, that they always do a statistic about how many transactions they can have per hour or per hour. Say that they can have 60 transactions. Within those 60 transactions, they can see, okay, we are making money out of the 60 transaction, $1,000. If for 1 hour we are down, we are losing $1,000. This is how you can start materializing the risk and say, okay, if I don't do this, this is how much I will pay for money. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Maybe.
One more question.
Yeah, please ask.
Yeah, actually, sir, you have told us that 27,001 has the maximum of the control, that around 85 to 90% of the control that 114 controls will cover up. Why do we need other frameworks and compliance? Why do we need NIST 800? Why do we need SPSI DSS?
Okay, let's put it this way. PCI DSS is
for the
applicable
payment.
only
for
the payment. Now, why did I did this simulation before? Because as I mentioned to you, every regulator comes up with something new. Okay, you can have GDPR as well. You mentioned this SP, which is NIST SP 800. You have as well GDPR. You have, as you mentioned, PCI DSS and others. Those are requirements coming from the industry. Let's take, if you are a bank or a merchant. As a merchant or the bank, Visa or MasterCard or even American Express will come to you and say, you need to be PCI DSS certified. Okay?
Yes.
So you need to be certified. You have no options to say, okay, I am ISO. But if you are already ISO, what I'm trying to say, if you're already ISO 27001 certified, you will do a mapping of controls already in place. Actually, I'm not talking about something I'm talking about some from experience. When I joined the bank, Crédit Lyonnais, I started with ISO 27001. Then they told me that we have to comply with PCI. So I had something in place already, framework ISO 27001. Then I looked at the requirements of PCI and tried to do a mapping between them. I found out that most of the documentation that which I developed on ISO are really complies with the PCI DSS. Now, to be more specific, if you look at the controls of ISO on the Annex A, it's not too deep technical. They will never tell you the password should be 8 characters with alphanumeric and complex and everything. If you go to PCI, they have, by the way, 514 controls instead of 114, but they go technically deep. They ask you to have VLANs. They ask you to have a firewall. In the 27001 Annex A, they will tell you have to put precautions to stop malicious code. They will never tell you implement a firewall, implement an antivirus. So basically, you do a mapping between both those requirements, and you will have, okay, you do a gap assessment. I have all of those still 20 or 15% still missing. I need to comply with. The same thing applies to GDPR. When you have ISO, you do a mapping between GDPR and ISO. You find, okay, there are still some missing control. You need to do this. To give an example, if you take GDPR, I would say you have to have privacy by default and privacy by design. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So privacy by default and by design you will not find it in ISO somewhere. They will tell you have to encrypt. So you need to map something to each other, and this is how you can do it. Imagine you don't have ISO 27001, and someone asks you to do a GDPR implementation from scratch. How difficult it's going to be to you? On top of this, regardless if you are not coming from any, because if you are in Europe, you have to be GDPR. Okay, outside Europe, in any other country, there is no requirements. Okay, what security you would be applying? You can say I will have NIST. Yes, you can have NIST, but no one will give you a certification on this. And if you are a company, a service provider, will say I'm complying with NIST, let's say SP 800. whatever you want, cybersecurity framework, whatever you want, you pick, you cannot prove to me that you are certified. If you go to ISO, yes, you can show me, you can send me a copy of your certification, say, we did our exercise and this is the audit certification.
Okay.
Other
Sir,
questions?
is PCI DS is really tough that only one company got that certification?
I didn't hear your question. Can you repeat?
Actually, at the starting, will you please go back to your introduction slide? It was written there that PCI, that's only one bank that has got the PCI DSS certification.
You're talking about my bank here. Okay.
Your
Actually,
introduction slide.
yes, here. We are still the only bank I'm talking about in Lebanon.
Yes.
Okay, in Lebanon, we are the only bank to be certified PCI. Yes, as a bank. There are service
PIC,
providers.
sorry, it is PIC DSS.
PCI DSS compliant. Yeah, we are.
There is a question from Loganathan. Shall I read it out, or
Okay.
you want?
Please do.
Yeah, you want
Please
to
do.
ask Loga? Okay, I'll read out that Tony for you on his behalf. What he is saying is, I'll just read out. Company ask for waive of some controls not related to their business, but auditor not satisfying the judgment of the company for waive. How to solve that? And what will be the procedure?
Again, if you are asking to have a waiver, you have to, it should be justifiable. We give an example. I can give you another example. One of the requirements say that you have to protect remote work users, okay? If as a company, I'm not having anyone from their home, they can work from their home. It's blocked. I don't have anyone to log in from their home or from any place in the world to access my system and to do whatever they want on my network. So this is a waiver. I don't have that. Okay. Why you are asking me to apply something it's not already there? So it's not applicable. It should be, the waiver should be very justifiable. You cannot just pick any you want and say, I don't want to apply it. Let's have an example. If I was your auditor, you would have applied, let's say, one requirement say you have to implement precautions or controls to stop malicious code. Okay. This malicious code, you will tell me that I have an antivirus. From my perspective, having an antivirus by itself alone is not enough.
Yes.
Other questions?
Yeah, anyone wants to ask anything?
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I want to ask you one thing. How you quantify the data loss, like in a insurance company or financial service provider? If customer data is leaked, it may have much repercussions apart from regulatory penalties and all. You can lose business also to competitors. So how can one quantify such type of data breaches?
Unfortunately, there is no a rule for that. That say, okay, if I have 100 accounts exfiltrated to outside, I will get this much money. If there is 1,000, this much money it's going to be penalized for this one. The problem when you're experiencing a data loss, sometimes it's too late for you to identify that. Let's take the example of Yahoo. Yahoo, they were compromised for 2 years. They didn't even know that. When it's announced everywhere, Yahoo was sold, the CEO was fired, and now it's becoming in part of Verizon. So unfortunately, you cannot have, if I lose this much money, this much of data, I will be penalized this much. There is no rule. And sometimes it's too late for you when you are having an experience in an attack, it will be too late. That's why, again, The difference by having someone with a company that is already have a security system in place like ISO, and someone doesn't have anything, the impact of the attack will be different. It will be less. Now, if you ask the question, if there is a company which is ISO 27001 certified, does it mean that they will not have attacks? No, they will have, but the impact will be less than the others. That's the difference. Even with PCI DSS, anyone who's certified with PCI doesn't mean that they will not have a breach, but the impact will be less. Statistically, companies that they are PCI certified, PCI DSS certified, they will experience only 4% or 5% of breach, where someone which is not certified, the statistic is 95%, so it's different.
Correct, Johnny. So that's why it becomes very difficult to do assessment of risk regarding the data loss. Yeah.
That's true. Other questions?
Yeah, I think Tony, you being from this, audit. So somebody has asked a question which is audit actually. As an auditor,
Yes.
the question is, this is from Anirudh Gopinath. I am reading it out. He says, as an auditor, what are the prerequisites to select samples, and how do we determine if it could be the right sample to audit?
Look, from a perspective on an auditor, I would ask from, first of all, I would ask what is the scope. Once they give me the scope, I will look at the processes. What are the processes? And from that process, I would select which is more important than the other. Now the question is, shall I catch a process or not? If it's done properly or not, it's by chance. Actually, when I was playing a role of a consultant, we did experience we had one process which was not up to the expectation as I wanted to be. However, the auditor didn't pick it up, picked another process, and we were successful. It depends on the auditor and his experience, but normally we look at the most important processes from a business perspective, and we select the samples based on that. If you are lucky somewhere, sometimes you might be lucky that if I pick a sample which is perfectly done and the other one is not perfectly done, you will escape from this. Remember, at the end, the certification lasts for 3 years, but depending on the scope of the organization, I might visit you every 6 months or every year, and I will look at the other areas which I didn't select the first time. Does it answer your question?
Hope so, Anirudh, I think. Tony, can we take up 2-3 more questions?
Yes, I'm open for them.
And Anirudh says, sounds interesting, thanks. So it is from Anirudh only to you, Tony. We have Mr. Saleh Nasser also, who just wanted to know, as IT manager, what I should do to have ISO requirements for my organization. The question is, as IT manager, what I should do to have ISO requirements for my organization.
Okay. First of all, he has to convince the management, his management, why it's so important to have ISO 27001. That's very important, because if the management are not on the same pace of what he's trying to implement, it will not be successful. That's one. Second, let's put it this way. If you are sick, you will go to a doctor. If you are not sick, you will never go to a doctor. So if you're not experiencing any problems within your IT environment, which is luckily it won't happen, you will not look for a solution. I would recommend to try to first of all to sell the idea of having ISO for the management. Look at the weaknesses what you are experiencing and say, okay, we need to improve this. Remember, now 27001 comes with the KPIs. So you need to show them before and after. If they are convinced, they will implement ISO, and you will take off your shoulders the problems encountering later on. As I mentioned, we need everyone to participate, to be responsible for the information security. We have a saying in, you are strong as your weakest link. If I have an end user who is not aware of security, he will make me suffer because of his ignorance somewhere. So please convince your company, your CEO with the ISO and the advantages, then it will be applicable afterwards.
Yeah, you're right, actually, Tony, because when we say ISO compliance, ISO comply and the certification when we need, basically to raise the level of client trust and applicability of the safety measures, actually.
That's true.
And Nikhil is asking, what is the validity of 27K? Is it for 1 year or 3 year, like a PCI?
No,
is
it's
1 year.
3 years. The
3
3
years.
years. 3 years, but you have to be revisit. You have to be, let's say, we call it a follow-up audit. Depends on the scope, or every 6 months or every year. If it's a small scope, it's going to be on a yearly basis. If it's a big organization, now every 6 months they will visit you. The auditor will revisit you.
Okay, but the certification will be valid for 1 year, 3 years?
No, 3 years. 3 years.
3 years only.
No, but let's be frank about it. If I visit you after 6 months or after 1 year, you are having a problem with your SMS somewhere, it's not applied properly, I would give you a notice. The second time, if I come to you and you still didn't fix it, I have the authority to withdraw the certification from you. I will give you time to fix it, but if you don't comply, then I will take the certification from you.
So that's a part of internal risk assessment, a gap assessment, you can say.
I'm talking about the whole system, ISMS.
Yeah, the whole system, ISMS, and when you come for an audit, you will raise this gap assessment kind of a thing. Now this is to be complied with if you find some gap, and that is
I will. It's going to be within my audit report if you want.
Okay.
At the end, as an auditor, I will raise an audit report.
Okay. Anyone wants to know anything? I have 3 terms actually, Tony. Very lavishly we use these 3 terms, and I think over the last 2 years more so, we say data privacy, then we say data security, and then we say information security. So I want to have your opinion on these 3 terms vis-a-vis PCI DSS, data GDPR, as well as ISO 27000K.
Actually, you can combine them in one.
Very brief overview, critical overview of these 3 terms.
Yes, for me, I would combine them, all of them, in one, because what are the information we are protecting? Remember what we are protecting. With GDPR, we talk about PII, personal identifier information, which means your name, your address, your credit card number, your health report, everything. So when we talk about PCI, we're talking about credit card number, so it's within PII. And when we talk about data protection or information security, we're talking about data for individuals. So yes, they somehow converge into one thing. For us, data privacy, data security, and data information security, they are converging into one thing that leads to having a data protection for everyone.
So that means you want to say that of late we have started almost for the last 2 years or 2.5 years, this EU GDPR, which has come into effect now and taking shape in a big way, is influenced by the information security, that is certification ISO 27K?
Actually, if you look at it, how it started, has nothing to do with ISO 27001. The GDPR idea was behind something. It was funny. He was a deputy in Europe Council. The guy was cheating on his wife with his mistress, and the hotel sent him to home a note saying, "Thank you for visiting us this year." And unfortunately, the wife opened the letter and she was not with him, and then this started the idea of having privacy of someone doing something.
Oh, that sounds interesting actually.
Yes.
And practical approach to the
yes, it's a practical approach.
So from privacy, it moved to data privacy actually.
You know, I'm not kidding. We had the same thing with a friend of mine who is responsible for cards fraud. There was someone who paid in South Africa from a bar, and where you can have everything over there. So he paid with his credit card instead of paying cash, and it was an alert for the bank saying, "Hey, is he there?" They called the home, and the wife picked up the phone and say, he was asking him, "Is your husband in the country or outside the country?" No, why? He's yes, he's outside. You know where? No. Well, he was trying to hide information about what happened. Then the husband called afterward to the bank and say, if my wife knows where I am, I'm gonna kill you.
Good one. So before I finally say thank you to Tony and to everyone, I would request if Rachit Gandhiji, if you are you hearing me? You can unmute and okay. I think he is not able to hear me. Tony, you are able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Gaurav, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, I would request Gaurav, and then after that, I would request Yash to say a few words about this session as your sum up statement. And if Mr. Saleh Nasser is also listening to me, if he is able to hear me, then probably just one line or maybe two lines to sum up this session, because this has to be a participative, interactive, a guiding session and not a monologue, as Tony mentioned in the beginning. So, Gaurav.
Yes, sir. May I?
Anyone else like to?
Hello.
Can I start?
Yeah, Gaurav.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony, for such an enriching and insightful session. We learned a lot today about ISO 27001. What are the key areas one should focus on? What are the how to conduct this in-house and take help from external parties? What auditors need to do? So thank you so much, Tony, for enlightening us. And all the listeners also thanks on their behalf. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav. Can I request just quickly to say?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, actually, as I am a non-technical background, so I've started my career in this infosec world. So this knowledge sharing session will going to help me to make the base. So really, thank you to Mr. Tony and that organizing team for that wonderful events.
No, it's good to hear from you, because you, as you said, you are not a technical person, but from
Yes, I've just started my
yeah,
career there.
but from a learning perspective, you have been very interactive and pointing towards certain pertinent questions which one should be looking at. Am I correct, Tony? Am I correct, Tony?
Yes. Actually, as I mentioned before, it wasn't a university. This is not a class in university. It was, I wanted to make interactive so everyone can benefit, the technical and non-technical people. And of course, the non-technical, because it's their responsibility to be certified, because the technical will lead, will help, but the decision comes from the business.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
May I request Mr. Saleh, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Tony, and the whole teams. Thank you for enlightening us. It's good things to hear about this ISO, which is actually not implemented in our organization, most of our organization. So this is good things to hear that, and thank you all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Nasser. I may request Ankita, because we were not able to hear you at that time. If your sound is clear from your side, we would like to hear about a line or two about this session today. Ankita?
Yeah, thank you so much for the session, Tony. It was very interesting, and so I really like it. And I have recently started working in this field, so it was very interesting.
No, it's good to have feedback from people who are having a lot of experience and exposure to the technical devices, or maybe the ISO and other things, and to the people who are coming forward to join this scenario and exploring much. Though we are physically distant in this COVID scenario, we are physically distant, but yes, we are digitally connected, and that's how this education should continue, and that is the whole purpose of organizing these webinars by Alvin Integrated Services. And this today was the fifth one. We look forward to your participation in many more. So finally, I would like to now thank you all, and thank you in particular, Tony, for delivering such an enriching knowledge sharing session. And I'm sure all of you who have joined today would have definitely some takeaways from the session today. Now, once again, my apology, because we had some problem in the beginning with the Tony was trying to reach out and got stuck somewhere. And we had to start this program a bit late, maybe about 30-45 minutes. But kudos to your patience, your understanding, and your support. We are able to run this. And we look forward to your continuous support, encouragement, and speakers like Tony to enlighten our participants. So thank you so much, Alvin and Tony and all others once again. And we look forward to catch up again.
Thank you for all participants for their patience. And as you mentioned, it was a problem with the time. Hopefully, everyone will take some giveaway with him at the end. And yes, let's start doing some security.
Yeah, definitely that is needed. And we would look forward to your feedback, critical overview, the points of improvement, and the kind of sessions you would like us to organize. That will help us a great lot. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a nice time and stay safe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you, everyone.
you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
thank you all.
Stay safe.
See you again, inshallah.
I need all those kinds. Sundar also. We know.